This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
So now let's move on to the setting. Take us there, Beth.
Well, first I wanted to note that for this week's Fruitloops short, we're going to include the history because it's a really important part of the story. So if you're Fruitloops short fruity, this one's going to be a little longer. So here we go. The setting is Colorado in 1863, which at the time was still a territory. The state of Colorado borders Wyoming and Nebraska to the north, Nebraska and Kansas to the east, Oklahoma and New Mexico to the south, and Utah to the west.
No offense, Colorado, but every time I visit you, something bad happens to me. Anyway, the Rocky Mountains stretch from 3,000 miles or 4,800 kilometers from the northernmost part of Western Canada to New Mexico and straight through the middle of Colorado. Also known as the Rockies. They are the largest mountain system in North America. Wow.
Yeah, they're gigantic. I mean, I've been to the Canadian Rockies.
And there's other Rockies.
Yeah, they go all the way up there. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, it's all part of the same system.
It's the same range.
Yes.
Yeah, but wow, I did not realize that. That's nuts.
It is. It really is.
Oh, nature. It's so cool. It's such a shame we're fucking it all up.
Yeah, a real shame, yeah.
A real shame.
Evidence of ancestral Puebloans living in southwestern Colorado dates back to around 500 CE. Native American tribes, including the Utes, Apaches, Navajos, Shoshones, Arapahoes, Cheyenne, Kiowa, Comanche, and Pawnees, eventually made different parts of Colorado their home.
Felipe and José Vivian Espinosa were fifth-generation descendants of Nicolás de Espinosa, a Nuevo Mexicano family of mestizo lineage entering in New Mexico in 1695. Whoa, time travel. So I just got a quick culture corner for everybody.
Okay.
Welcome to Culture Corner with Wendy and Beth. So the term mestizo, we've described it before, it's been a while, is used to describe mixed ethnic heritage of those who can trace their ancestry to Native American or indigenous and the Spanish who controlled Mexico for 3 centuries, or both. Initially, mestizos were positioned between Spanish colonizers, which were considered the tippy-top, super superior, and then the indigenous peoples who were considered inferior at the bottom of the caste. And this hierarchical structure reinforced white supremacy and still does to this day, as it perpetuated the idea that European blood is the best, superior. And white supremacy asserts the superiority of white people over other racial and ethnic groups. In the context of, mestizaje, white supremacy manifests in several ways, like in racial hierarchy, colorism, social mobility, and all the white erasure of indigenous identity.
Nuevo Mexicano residents originated in the historical region of Santa Fe de Nueva Mexico, which is today the U.S. state of New Mexico, and other parts of the southwestern United States. The Nuevo Mexicano people were people descended from Spanish settlers in the Southwest before it was annexed to the U.S. and were referred to as Hispanos.
In 1803, the United States bought the Louisiana Territory from France in what is known as the Louisiana Purchase. This included the eastern half of current-day Colorado. At the end of the Mexican-American War, that was 1846 to 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo gave the United States rights to the western part of Colorado. In 1850, the United States purchased the remaining territory in central Colorado from the Republic of Texas.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Yeah, you
Like
just
how
go
that all
around just
got-
buying,
yeah.
just
Buying up land.
But
yeah.
it's crazy because
It's
people live
crazy.
there. And when I
I
get into
know.
my shout outs, it sheds a little bit of light on this just to,
Okay.
to give you another version. So
Okay,
anyway.
cool. At the southern edge of the Colorado Territory, about 7,000 Hispanos lived in the San Luis Valley. They had built dozens of plazas, which were small villages of adobe and thatched roof structures, along the Conejos and San Antonio rivers that flowed east into the Rio Grande.
The residents raised crops and goats and cattle, and during the time that this area was owned by Mexico, they had taken advantage of Mexico's communal land grants that encouraged northward expansion.
These grants, also known as Mercedes, were a type of land grant that provided resources for communities, including land for farming, grazing, hunting, fishing, and recreation. The grants were typically organized around a central plaza and included individual allotments for each household, as well as common lands for community use.
That sounds so beautiful.
Pretty cool. Yeah.
It's like in The Walking Dead, but before you find out that the community leader is a really evil, murderous person. So, between the 1820s and the 1840s, governance of the valley shifted from Spain to Mexico, then to the United States. In 1848, after the Mexican-American War ended, most of the people in the area suddenly became American citizens and residents of New Mexico. Like, what?
Surprise, motherfuckers!
Whoa! Oh my God! Wait, I live in a new nation, and I
New
didn't
country.
think of how wild that is, and think
That
of
would
where
be
we are
insane.
today. Right? That
Yeah,
is it.
yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it is nuts. In the decade that had followed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, many Mexican people lost the titles to their lands because territory courts often settled land disputes in favor of Anglo settlers. Then in 1859, gold was discovered in Colorado, sparking a gold rush.
Making it even worse.
Yeah.
So tens of thousands of Anglo prospectors traveled to the territory from their homes on the East Coast and the Midwest. The new residents built cabins and sawmills and encampments with names like Denver City, Colorado City, Golden City, Torey, and Gold Hill. That's my bougie white lady voice. I don't know if it
Okay.
worked. Anyway.
It kind of sounds like the wife of the staircase guy.
Oh no!
Remember that lady? Automobiles.
Yes. Oh my God. Okay, I'm going with it.
Okay.
By 1860, an estimated 43,000 residents were living within the territory. The vast majority, though, were white men, white property-owning men.
The gold rush transformed the territory into an almost lawless area where people of color were more likely to be killed by mob violence. Anglo miners resented the Hispano miners and settlers, believing that they had the rights to the land and the gold.
What? How, sir?
Because they're white?
God, on its face, it makes no fucking sense. Man, in the absence of any legal authority or direction, miners developed miners or people's courts and vigilance committees, which is crazy. A vigilance committee is a group of, this is laughable that this is a thing. A vigilance committee is a group of private citizens who take it upon themselves to administer law and order or exercise power in places where they consider the governmental structures or actions inadequate. That's white deputism. That's also policing in America. Anyway, but the Merriam-Webster dictionary simply defines it as committee of vigilantes. And that's terrifying.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Hispano, quote-unquote, offenders received no legal protection against the injustice handed down by these minors' courts. The swiftness of minors' courts usually translated into mob action. Defendants found guilty were whipped or hung by the neck until dead.
Oh, yeah. We forgot to say this was still during like the time of enslavement. And I didn't look into enslavement in Colorado, but I wouldn't be surprised if in Colorado, the state itself, that people were leasing Black bodies and Indigenous bodies and brown bodies for labor, etc. But I also thought about lynching probably wasn't illegal or anything like that at the time.
No.
So in Colorado between 1859 and 1876, Anglo mobs performed at least 102 lynchings of Spanish-speaking males. These numbers are probably underestimated. No shit. As many newspapers didn't bother to report about the deaths and murders of people of color, and people of color who did try to report, because there was some incognito journalism. And if they spoke about it, they were in danger of being harmed.
Yeah. Before prisoners were shot, beheaded, hanged, or even burned to death, some mobs performed, quote, non-lethal collective violence, unquote.
What? The committees decided this?
Yeah, the committees.
Oh my God.
Such as whipping, branding, dragging, harassment, or ripping clumps of hair from their scalps.
Oh my God.
Leaders often allowed the use of torture to coerce alleged thieves into a confession.
That's horrifying.
Yeah.
That is horrifying. Wow. I'm like so uncomfortable. In 1858, Fort Garland was constructed ostensibly to protect the Anglo settlers in the San Luis Valley from the Native Americans. But many Hispano settlers believed that the army outpost was also a warning to them.
In 1861, the U.S. government handed over a patch of New Mexico above the 37th parallel that included the San Luis Valley to the new Colorado Territory. The reasoning was mostly aesthetic. It straightened the border of Colorado, which looked better on maps. But now these residents were suddenly in the Colorado Territory. So, like, first you're in Mexico, and then you're in the United States, and now you're in Colorado.
Yeah. These borders are so dumb. I mean, have you ever really, seriously, borders are just dumb. They're just dumb.
Yeah.
Unless they're natural, like a river or an ocean or a mountain. Like,
Right.
These are all arbitrary and have changed. We've seen that throughout time, that it's people making decisions in high places that decide these ridiculous things.
Right.
So with the addition of the San Luis Valley, Colorado gained a larger population, which was important if the territory wanted to achieve statehood. However, almost immediately after assuming control of the land, Colorado's government regarded these new Hispano citizens as a nuisance. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And the Hispano residents felt disenfranchised. Mexican property law had been based on generational caretaking. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the American government promised to honor the historical Mexican settlements.
How many times have we seen the American government do this and then do a switcheroo on everybody? But American laws allowed territorial officials to decide ownership, and they most often ruled in favor of white settlers. And as more property fell into the hands of Anglos, longtime communal grazing land was suddenly cut off.
The government also played dirty tricks. Surprise!
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
During the Colorado Territory's legislative sessions, no translator was provided for the Valley's Spanish-speaking representatives. And after bills were passed, government officials refused to translate the laws into Spanish.
That's like, this is why they don't want the kids to know American history, is because it is
horrible.
Horrible. But golly, it is so important to know this. I mean, this sounds like what's happening today.
Yeah.
I mean, not much has changed, and that is why it is so important.
That's why it's so wild. Yeah.
Yeah. Colorado's southern border became the epicenter of discontent within the territory. Taxes were levied without explanation. Hispano men had their names recorded for potential conscription into the Union Army. Food and livestock were recorded for potential seizure by Army soldiers. Bullshit.
In 1862, a count was taken of weapons and ammunition among Plaza residents, escalating distrust among the Hispano population. They didn't understand why the government was doing what it was doing, why it was collecting certain taxes, and why their land rights were now in disarray.
Surveillance
Because
state
nobody
much?
told them.
Yeah. Counting my weapons and what the hell?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially considering everybody else. Were they counting other people's or other populations' guns?
Yeah, I don't know.
Think so.
Yeah.
The Rocky Mountain News, which apparently was super racist at the time, did not help. So in contention wherever possible. And actually white media did this
A lot, yeah.
and still does this.
Yeah.
They editorialized using the derogatory term quote unquote greasers for the region's Hispano residents.
In one article, they said, quote, "The Utes have been growling considerable about their annuity, and the greasers a great deal more about the taxes. It is said that some greasers have sworn to pay their taxes with the rifle," unquote. Which reminds me of Fox News when they say, some people say,
Yeah.
you know, it's like, it's just, they're gossiping.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah.
they're spreading rumors.
There's no fact or anything like that.
Nope.
I mean, and I can think of so many eruptions in American history where there's been racial violence, and it's been because
of this
white
kind of
newspapers
thing.
publish this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So the Rocky Mountain News also printed erroneous articles, fake news. It's fake news, folks. One said that a company of soldiers had been ordered to Fort Garland to stop any quote-unquote emergency in the valley. The article said that Anglo settlers and army soldiers were prepared to flatten the plazas should there be a fight. If you have to do violence to, like, achieve something, maybe you should do something else.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't. Yeah. So this is the climate that the Espinosa brothers were living in at the time of their alleged murder spree.
Okay, so now let's get into the early life of the Bloody Espinosas. So the family of Pedro Ignacio Espinosa and his wife Maria Gertrudes Chavez lived in the hamlet of El Rito, some 35 miles west of Taos, New Mexico territory. At that time, Santa Fe de Nuevo Mexico.
The couple had 2 daughters and 3 sons, including Felipe de Nerio Espinosa, born in 1828, and his younger brother José Vivian Espinosa, born in 1831, who was called Vivian. The Mexican census of 1845 from El Rito, New Mexico, lists several members of the Espinosa family.
Around 1854, Felipe married 17-year-old Maria Secundina Hurtado. In some accounts, he kidnapped her. In the story, Felipe had, quote, "no luck at finding a wife in the El Rito area, and no parent would let their daughter marry this wild man," unquote. So he kidnapped Maria Secundina from a different town, and I heard that he was not pleasant to look at, that his face looked like a jack-o'-lantern. Like his teeth were described as like big and far apart.
Yeah, they were not very nice about him.
No, yes,
no.
Exactly. Yes.
But the Hurtados were neighbors of the Espinosas.
Oh.
So it seems as though the kidnapping story was totally made up.
Huh, okay.
And in any case, the 1860s U.S. Census lists a Felipe Nerio Espinosa living in Coneos, San Fernando Valley, Taos, New Mexico, with his wife and 2 children, a girl of 5 and a son of 2.
After the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in February 1948, the family ended up in American territory, just overnight, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
In 1858, having lost his land, Felipe, his wife and children, and their extended families moved to San Rafael, 2 miles west of Conejos, at the west end of the San Luis Valley, which became a part of the territory of Colorado in 1861.
The Espinosa family lived in a jacal, which is an adobe-style hut with a thatched roof. There were 4 beds, and the family had very few possessions. It has been reported that they farmed and herded sheep, but also rustled horses and committed robberies. But did they?
Don't know.
Don't know.
Hi, I'm Matt Harris. Seton Tucker and I host the podcast Impact of Influence, which for 2 years covered in depth Alec Murdaugh, who was eventually convicted in 2023 of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul. That story continues to evolve, and we will cover that. Plus, we will tell you stories of other true crime events that have happened in the South. Please join us on Impact of Influence. And give us a follow on the Impact of Influence Facebook page.
Something is creeping in, don't follow it down.
Let me introduce you to Barry Clue, an authorised financial advisor from New Zealand and a very special kind of stain on humanity.
He was a very knowledgeable young guy.
He was a registered financial advisor.
Type of guy that was bending over backwards to help you.
Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that Barry sounds like a great guy, and you'd be right. Well, right up until the point when you're wrong.
It was all fictitious.
She stole from my son who has a disability.
Chris never knew. He died believing that we're all taken care of.
A psychopath is somebody who lacks empathy, acts impulsively. I think there's a strong case that Barry might be all of those things, actually.
To find out how Barry Clue stole over $15 million from 81 victims, subscribe to Clueless, the long con. That's Clueless, spelt Klooghless.
So let's get into the timeline. This is a story that has become legend. So accounts are conflicting. Names, dates, and circumstances of the killings differ. Primary sources tell the Espinosa story almost exclusively through the white lens of the territory's settlers, government officials, and military officers. And stories are confused and narratives are exaggerated for dramatic effect.
Yeah.
Another culture corner here. Beth and Wendy here again. So urban legend or leyendas in Mexican and indigenous culture, it's just full of them, full of myths and legends that essentially shape the morals and provide, life lessons. Legends that often have historical, political, philosophical, and they have cultural value as well. And during the colonial era, new narratives emerged, blending indigenous traditions of the Americas and then blended in European influences and then a couple Catholic beliefs sprinkled on there. And these stories reflect the vision of the world and the lives of the people, combining true historic events with embellishments. And it seems like there's a lot of embellishing and myth weaved into this historical murderous event.
But I would also say that a lot of it is white people just making shit up.
Yes.
And we'll get into it, but all the Espinosas could read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like Felipe was actually a really good writer. And he wrote poems and odes, and his language was flowery. And I think some of it was the culture.
Yeah.
They had more flowery language than the Americans.
Yeah. It's a romantic language, Spanish.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, as far as the story goes, in one version, Felipe and Vivian Espinosa's parents, grandparents, brother, and sister were killed in a bombardment of Veracruz, Mexico, during the Mexican-American War, which is, this is 100% not true. That did not happen.
Oh!
As that narrative went, Felipe thought he received an order from the Virgin Mary to kill 600 Americans, 100 for each of his dead family members.
Okay. In another example, the Espinosas pledged allegiance to the Santa Hermandad de la Sangre de Nuestra Jesucristo, aka the Holy Brotherhood of the Blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, or Penitente Brotherhood, a sect of lay Roman Catholics who operated moradas, or meeting houses, unaffiliated with the local church.
It's unclear if the Espinosas were actually penitentes. Later generations of their relatives have claimed a connection, but there is no doubt that Anglo settlers and soldiers in southern Colorado, many of them Protestant, gave Hispano Catholics the side eye.
Yeah. Lack of understanding.
Yep.
That's all it is.
Yep.
Many of the articles claim that the Espinosa brothers led a gang made up of their cousins. This was not true. And there was only ever the two brothers and later a nephew. And we already talked about the story of Felipe kidnapping his wife.
Right. So there's a lot of different stories that are not true or have, just a little bit of truth to them.
I gotta say, Beth, you have done an amazing job sort of parsing through all of it, though.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, like the things that you've said are not true. I 100% believe them. I'll get into it later, but I heard all kinds of wild stuff and I just ate it all up as if it was true.
It just sounded so wild. And then
but I was like, let's go with it.
I thought so too, as I'm reading all these stories, but then I noticed that, over here they said this, over here I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What is true?
Oh, man.
So it's definitely possible that Felipe and his brother Vivian, driven by poverty, had become desperate enough to steal horses and rob freight wagons. But one of the original settlers in the plazas, a man named José Vincente Velasquez, a respected citizen and elder, personally knew the Espinosas and retold stories about them to his children. And he said, quote, "The brothers were not outlaws. They were good, law-abiding citizens," unquote.
I love that. And then also, their nation changed overnight, which you got to think, we've talked about this, laws are subjective. It depends on who's the boss. And so that's another thing to consider. And at the parish church in Conejos on April 27th, 1862, Maria Gertrudis Chavez and her son José Vivian Espinosa served as godparents to the infant daughter of José Manuel Galvez. By Hispano custom, relationships between parents and godparents were based on honor, principle, and trust.
The spiritual ties of compadrazgo, or shared parenthood, was, and still is, an important indication of respect, affection, and familial bonding. Hispano parents would never select an immoral person to act as a godparent to their child.
Great point. And if you recall, there was a military census of the plazas counting any weapons and ammunition among plaza residents. This census reveals that in October of 1862, Felipe Espinosa owned one carbine, which is a short rifle, and half a pound of ammunition. Vivian Espinosa, however, owned no weapons and had no ammunition. So they weren't exactly armed to the teeth.
Yeah, they weren't huge owners of weapons running around robbing everybody, is what I'm gathering.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you.
Although I guess I could rob people with one rifle, but I mean, it could happen.
Or maybe they asked politely.
In any case, we did our best to sift through the information and misinformation. And as the story goes, sometime in about 1862 or early 1863, a priest from Taos reported to the New Mexican military authorities that a freight runner who was hauling goods for the priest had been robbed and beaten.
The freight runner implicated the Espinosa brothers in the crime. Word was sent to Fort Garland in southern Colorado that the Espinosas should be arrested. U.S. Deputy Marshal George Austin and 16 soldiers proceeded to the Espinosa home near San Rafael.
Attempting to get the Espinosas to Fort Garland without a confrontation, on the evening of January 19th, 1863, Lieutenant Nicholas Holt presented himself at their door. According to a plan hatched by Lieutenant Holt and Deputy Austin, he was to tell the pair that he was on a recruiting trip and would ask them to join the army.
When the Espinosas allowed Lieutenant Holt and Deputy Austin in, each would grab a brother and then the soldiers would rush in to assist. However, when Vivian answered the door, he simply told Holt that they would get back to him in the morning. I love that.
Later. Goodbye.
Goodbye. That's funny.
The following morning, Holt and his troopers again appeared at the Espinosa's door. When Holt asked about the brothers enlisting, Vivian answered that they would not.
None for me, thank you.
Holt then attempted to grab Vivian, but Vivian ducked back into the house. A gunfight followed in which a Mexican corporal was killed.
The Espinosas fled as Lieutenant Holt shot at them, discharging all of the bullets in one pistol, but missing every single shot. He then drew a second pistol, but it wouldn't work. I love this part of the story.
I know.
Frustrated, he threw the pistol.
When it hit the ground, the pistol discharged and the bullet struck him in the forehead, severely wounding him.
He played himself. That's so funny.
Meanwhile, Deputy Austin and some of the soldiers went after the Espinosa brothers.
As Austin chased the Espinosas across the frozen Conejos River, his horse slipped on the ice. So slipped on the ice, breaking Austin's leg just above the ankle. Oh no. Some of the soldiers took the wounded deputy to the San Rafael Plaza, while the others continued the pursuit of the Espinosas into the mountains, but they eventually gave up. Oh, man.
Okay, this next part's not so funny.
Okay.
The soldiers confiscated all of the Espinosa's animals and possessions and burned down their house. The Espinosa family now had no food, no beds, no household items, livestock, or home.
We could not find out what happened to Felipe and Vivian's wives and children, but one article said, quote, "The decision to seize virtually everything left the Espinosa's wives, children, and extended families destitute," unquote.
On March 16, 1863, Francis William Bruce, in some articles identified as Franklin Bruce, left his log cabin south of Canyon City, bound for his sawmill located 12 miles away. His horses and empty wagon returned alone to the cabin, and his body was found near the mill, shot through the heart.
After sunset on March 18th, a sawmill worker named Henry Harkins was found dead in his cabin by two of his friends. Harkins had been shot once in the head, which had also been split open by an axe, and he had been stabbed twice in the chest.
A sheriff and deputy out of Hardscrabble traced the killers to Colorado City, then Manitou, and finally up Ute Pass toward Fairplay before losing the trail. Sometime afterward, the lawmen came across the body of a mail station operator named James Adelman. He had been shot through the head at his remote ranch on the Ute Pass Road.
On April 8, 1863, outside Fairplay, two miners, Jacob Binkley and Abram Nelson Shoup, were murdered at their campsite along the road to Denver. Binkley was shot in the back. Shoup was stabbed 3 times before he ran 400 yards down a gulch, where he collapsed and died. On April 25th, Bill Carter was shot and killed northwest of Fairplay.
On April 26, 2 men, Frederick Lehman and Sol Sega, were murdered, this time northeast of Fairplay. Rumors circulated that a crucifix had been cut into the chest of one of the victims. Another had his head crushed with a rock.
All of the victims were white men, settlers who'd arrived from elsewhere in North America. With the body count rising, the public demanded that territorial officials bring the murderers to justice.
But lawmen and military troops were widely scattered, and nobody knew who was responsible for the murders. With the Civil War in progress, some theorized that they were Confederate sympathizers from Texas. Others thought it might be Native Americans defending their territories.
And now let's get into the investigation and the arrest. So murder victims Fred Lehman and Sol Sega had lived in California Gulch and had many friends there. These friends called a general meeting to discuss a plan to raise funds for a posse. What? 17 men volunteered to set out immediately, with a man named John McCannon as their leader.
In late April, a lumber freighter named Edward Metcalf was ambushed between Alma and Fairplay. Metcalf was leading a team of oxen over a mountainous trail near Fairplay when a bullet struck him in the chest.
Luckily for him, the bullet was stopped by a bundle of mail and a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation that he had tucked in his jacket. Is that true? Because that sounded like legend to me.
It does sound like bullshit, but that's what all the articles said.
Okay.
I don't know if it's true or not.
Okay, because I heard that, I was like, that's so corny. So a second shot was fired but missed. Metcalf fell over his wagon seat after he was shot, and his oxen bolted.
At the sound of gunshots, a nearby resident grabbed a rifle. He later reported seeing, quote, 2 dark-skinned Mexicans standing in the bushes, unquote. Metcalf met the McCannon posse on its way south. Though he didn't get a close look at his attackers, Metcalf said that one of the shooters was taller than the other, and both were dark-skinned, probably of Mexican descent.
The description matched the Espinosas, who had fled from the Fort Garland soldiers a month earlier. Now authorities believe that they knew who their targets were, and the newspapers came up with a name for them: the Bloody Espinosas.
The governor of the territory, John Evans, wanted the Espinosas found dead or alive, and the newspapers published a notice about a $50 reward for the arrest and delivery of the Espinosa brothers. And I don't know exactly what $50 would have been because I used an inflation calculator that didn't go back that far, but I'm guessing it would probably be about $2,000. That's my guess.
It didn't go back that far? It's
It
crazy.
didn't go back that far. Yeah. But none of the newspaper correspondents reported any real physical or helpful description of the Espinosas.
Isn't that a trip? How there wasn't a real detailed description?
Oh, yeah. Just some Mexican dudes.
Yeah.
Find them.
Right. And but we've talked about before how
just string them up.
But that's how white supremacy gets you.
Yeah.
Is by naturally we're not as good at identifying or distinguishing features of people who are different races than us, or different ethnic backgrounds. So to use that so that white people will fear and therefore take it upon themselves to sort of police anybody who isn't like
different.
you. Yeah. So anyway, a few days later, McCannon's men spotted 2 horses grazing in a meadow near the mouth of 4 Mile Creek. As Vivian Espinosa approached the horses, a posse member shot him in the head, killing him instantly. Felipe Espinosa escaped.
24 hours ago, I found out the person that I'd been dating and seeing for the last 6 months is a con man.
That is my sister Emma. Andrew Tonks's lies had been so convincing, she'd invested $300,000 with him. However, the tables were about to turn on Andrew. What he didn't know was that Emma had discovered his real identity. But to get any chance of justice, Emma had to act like it was business as usual. Coming up in this series,
and that's when murder, all this stuff goes through my mind. I'm really, really scared.
I'm assuming Sarah has watched too much Netflix and figures I've been defrauding you. Couldn't be further from the truth.
That's what this was, a real-life story that seems so unbelievable, but it was actually true.
A true story that all starts with one simple swipe to the right. I'm Sarah Ferris.
And I'm Emma Ferris, and this is my story, Conning the Con.
The posse cut off Vivian's head and took it back to Fair Play as a trophy.
Whoa!
For years, a well-known doctor kept the bleached skull, and Vivian's rifle went to a private collector. At the Espinosa campsite, the posse had found a team and wagon, and at Canyon City, the posse displayed the wagon's contents to a, quote, large and excited crowd, unquote, which is gross.
Yeah. The posse identified the clothing and personal effects of those belonging to the men the Espinosas had allegedly murdered. Reportedly, a coat, hat, and boots belonging to Frederick Lehman were found among the items in the wagon, as well as his horses.
But the posse could not associate some of the clothing found to known murder victims, so they decided that, based on the amount of clothing found, the Espinosas must have murdered at least 12 people.
Oh my God! That's not how you investigate murders! Oh my!
It could have been their clothes, for Christ's sakes.
Imagine going into Goodwill and be like, there are 10,000 murder victims here. Officer! Oh my God. That is so dumb. These lawmen in the Wild West are so crazy. And now that I'm thinking about, why are there so many movies about white, like, cowboys and lawmen?
Because it's crazy. Because it's insane. That's why. It is. It's crazy.
Oh my God. Oh my God. According to an article published on May 21st, 1863, in the Weekly Commonwealth and Republican news correspondent Dornick, apparently correspondents used pseudonyms or other names at the time. Anyway, Dornick reported that the posse found Mr. Lehman's memorandum book at the Espinosa camp and that one of the Espinosas had written in Spanish on several pages.
Dornick and some of the members of the posse attempted to translate the pages in Spanish, quote, without the aid of Spanish books,
oh my
unquote.
God.
And they described the writings as, quote, a descent into madness,
oh
unquote.
Oh my fucking God. That is so... They couldn't find somebody to help? What in the world? Oh my God. So it allegedly contained, quote, descriptions of murders and mutilations, incoherent and politically charged diatribes, transcribed and perhaps imagined conversations with family members, unsent letters, and underlying it all, a divine righteousness, unquote. What, bruh?
So really, they just didn't understand the writing.
But I mean, you couldn't call somebody.
It's wild. Yeah.
It's so,
yeah, it's wild.
I mean, oh my gosh, I can't. Sorry.
So it's very likely that Felipe used poetic writing, which was misinterpreted by people who did not speak his language. In any case, the original memorandum book has been lost to history, so we will never know.
Oh man, that is really unfortunate.
Yeah.
I mean, all it took was just asking somebody nearby, can you help? So Felipe also reportedly composed an ode and several letters during his time in hiding. According to the oral history of Elder José Vincente Velázquez, Felipe delivered 5 handwritten letters in Spanish to the Indian Agency's office of Lafayette Head.
In a letter addressed to the territorial governor, he asked that the governor restore the Espinosas' property that had been seized. Quote, "They ruined our families. They took everything in our home, first our beds and blankets, then our provisions. Seeing this, we said we would rather be dead than see such infamies committed on our families." Unquote.
Wow. Profound. None of these letters exist today, unfortunately. The newspaper correspondent who reported on these letters did not report who translated them. In closing, the correspondent wrote, quote, "Felipe Espinosa should be immediately hunted down and hung on the highest limb," unquote. By publishing these remarks, the newspaper was promoting vigilante, racist justice. Surprise.
Yeah. Felipe recruited a nephew to travel with him, often reported as being José Vincente Espinosa, who was anywhere between 13 and 16 years old. It was different in every article.
Oh, okay.
It's unknown why the nephew joined him, but whatever the reason, a number of murders, including one Hispano man, were attributed to the pair across the southern portion of Colorado Territory over the next several months.
It's impossible to know if Felipe and his nephew were responsible for these murders, but by early fall of 1863, at least 11 murders in southern and central Colorado had been attributed to the Espinosas.
Reportedly, from Fairplay to New Mexico Territory, public terror grew daily, and the newspapers did not help. Freighters feared being on the roads, and nearly all travel and commerce stopped unless accompanied by military troops. No mail entered or left South Park without guard. Ranchers abandoned their properties and fled to more populated areas.
Wow. In October of 1863, a Hispano woman named Dolores Sanchez reportedly traveled from Trinidad to Fort Garland on an overnight trip by horse and wagon. Her driver was Leander D. Philbrooks. Reportedly, Felipe and Vivian Espinosa stopped and robbed them.
Philbrooks escaped and fled on foot. Sanchez was reportedly raped and left to die. However, one newspaper correspondent, known as Typo, wrote that Sanchez was not raped and that she sat talking to the Espinosas for some time.
In either case, the story has never been substantiated. The military post records include no entries about Dolores Sanchez and Philbrooks and their presumed altercation with the Espinosas.
So it might be bullshit.
Aha.
Yeah. As the military stationed in Fort Garland, Canyon City, and Fairplay continually failed to catch the Espinosas, Thomas Tobin, a well-known tracker, trapper, and mountain guide, was called from his nearby ranch and outfitted with a group of about 15 soldiers to find them.
In mid-October, on their third morning hunting the Espinosas, the group found their campsite. According to Tobin, as he crept up on the Espinosa camp, he saw Felipe dressing a carcass for food. Tobin stepped on a twig, and hearing it snap, Felipe lunged for his gun. Tobin shot first, wounding Felipe in the side, and the outlaw tumbled into the campfire as he shouted for Jose to run.
When the boy appeared, Tobin shot and killed him. Felipe, meanwhile, began crawling across the forest floor, then braced himself against a tree. Felipe raised his weapon, fired, and missed. The other men unleashed a volley of bullets, striking Felipe multiple times.
After the Espinosas were dead, Tobin decapitated both Felipe and the teenage boy. Tobin placed the Espinosas' heads into a burlap sack. he reportedly found a diary with a record of the Espinosas killings, which logged a total of 32.
Tobin arrived at Fort Garland with Felipe and Vicente's bloodied heads on October 16, 1863. A Fort Garland surgeon placed each head in a jar filled with alcohol, where they remained in the post adjutant's office for several days, and people came to view them. Yay!
What?
The severed heads were also displayed throughout the territory.
Why? Oh my God.
It's gruesome. Life was gruesome back then.
Yeah. I mean, in the context of this story and it's like Civil War time.
Yeah, it's just awful.
Yeah. So now let's get into where are they now? Well, I'll tell you. Tobin reportedly returned to the Espinosas campsite, took the headless bodies of Felipe and Vincente, and buried them somewhere near San Rafael. No historical accounts record where he buried the bodies. There was no closure for the grieving family because the gravesite was a secret.
The assassination of Felipe Espinosa would make Tobin famous in Colorado. After he buried the beheaded bodies, he allegedly was, quote, so concerned over the Espinosa family's poverty, he regularly contributed to their welfare, unquote. But we don't know the veracity of this claim.
No one knows for sure what became of the heads of Felipe and José Espinosa. They reportedly sat on the desk of the editor of the Fair Play Flume. Is that a porno? And later in the offices of the Rocky Mountain News. After that, however, the heads seemingly disappeared.
Yeah, so they're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Descendants of the Espinosas still live throughout Colorado and in the Southwest.
All right, so let's get into our takeaways and thoughts. What do you think about this case, Beth?
Well, the story of the Espinosas has been sensationalized by Anglo news correspondents and editors who promoted violence and prejudice.
Yeah.
It's wild to me how different the stories are from one article to another.
I'll say.
So I relied heavily on an article by historian Virginia Sanchez. She did a ton of research on this story.
Yeah.
It was a really good article. It'll be in our show notes if you want to look at that. Another thought I had was how much Americans love vengeance stories.
Oh, yeah.
Like Braveheart, people love the shit out of vengeance stories, like Liam Neeson's whole career.
Yeah. Oh my God. A set of skills? 6 movies out of that?
Yeah, and if the Espinosas had been white, this story probably would have been told 100 times from their perspectives.
Yeah.
And as I was researching this story, I was reminded of Kehoe, the Native American man who is credited with like every murder that happened in Las Vegas.
Yes, I forgot about that one. Yes.
Yeah. And murder is never okay. But while researching this story, I did come to understand why it happened the way that it did. It wasn't just some wild Mexican went on a rampage for no reason. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
His whole family was destroyed. Basically.
Yeah. I agree. We've said this before, but one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right.
And I gotta think that they morally, I mean, we don't know because no dummies ever translated the diaries, but that they must have felt that somehow what they were doing was justified given what they had lost. In my mind.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
I'm sure they were very, very angry about what happened to them and what happened to their families.
Yes.
I'm sure that was part of it. But yeah, I'm sure they felt like justified.
Yeah. But there's no winners. I mean, it doesn't matter who you're rooting for. And again, if you got to use violence to acquire something, here's a thought. Maybe you shouldn't fucking have it. That goes for the colonizers, for, the Espinosas robbing people. I don't know. It just try something else. I don't know. And it makes sense to me as well why things ended up the way that they did. And shame on the newspapers at the time who sort of
they were horrible.
fueled this white supremacist violence and
sowed discontent and misinformation.
They made it a lot worse.
It's just awful.
Yeah. And, context of the time, it was a very, very violent time, but there was a profound racial component to a lot of the violence that was happening, including within this story. And then, oh my God, the police, those bumbling, fumbling, messy fucking hoes. They, into like levels, degrees of comedy I never imagined could happen in real life. They did it. They did it.
Yeah.
And I what's the opposite of an air horn?
Great scene.
Yeah. A fart.
Would have been a great scene in a movie.
Yeah. Oh my God. I really enjoyed learning about that part.
But yeah, murder is not justified.
Agreed. Not at all.
But yeah, I see how this happened.
Yeah, completely. Fruities, let us know what you think. Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media.
This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.
On the morning of August 1st, 1966, shots ring out from the observation deck of the clock tower on the University of Texas campus. It marks the infamous beginning of the modern era of mass shootings in America.
You're listening to Stop the Killing podcast. Join us as we take you behind the crime scene tape to explain global mass shootings and mass attacks. I'm Sarah Ferris, but more importantly, this is Catherine Schweit, the former head of the FBI's active shooter program.
I spent 5 years as the FBI's top executive looking for answers to the mass shooting crisis. I've been at the shooting scenes, I've traced heroic acts of bravery, and I've sat silently and listened to the heart-wrenching stories from survivors.
Amongst this horror, there is hope. We all hold the key to stop the killing. You just need to know how to unlock the door. Download Stop the Killing and be part of the solution. Search Stop the Killing on Apple, Spotify, and all the usual suspects.
So when the scammer uses the hypnotic method of building rapport, then they create dysfunctional, delusional reality.
That's how a scam begins. Convincing the mark that it makes perfect sense to hand over their money to a con artist. The Scams and Cons podcast tells you how scams are run. You'll hear how people are convinced to buy fake art, buy machines that print money, or steal your house.
I get a phone call from my wife, and she let me know that they had decided to move all our stuff out. I could no longer do anything about it except go through an eviction.
And you'll hear it from the experts, people who run the cons.
So we go to your bank, you go in and get $6,000 cash, give us each $3,000, we give you this. You go home, and what you find out is cut up newspaper.
It's fun to know how the trick is done, and that's what Scams and Cons is all about. Listen at scamsandcons.com or wherever fine podcasts are found.